I actually don't believe there's that great a distinction when it comes to managing a family office. The problem is as follows. Many principals lose sight of that. In other words, they put their heart and soul, blood, sweat, and tears into running a family business. They're successful, they create wealth, and then something happens where they kind of go down this false assumption. I can just kind of put the money over here. That's a very dangerous thing. The founder, rightfully so, wants to take some time and chill and enjoy the wealth that they've created for their family. But the reality is, making money and keeping money are two different things. They're very different.
Well, you're the first person that I've spoken with that talked about the family office the same way you would talk about a business. Identify the right seats, put the right people in those seats, and then make sure they're doing the right thing. It should be no different for the family office. If you've seen one family office, you've seen one family office. A lot of people don't like that, but at the same time, it's so true, because what functions you need in your family office may be different than somebody else's, so it's going to look different.
A leading voice in family business. You're listening to
The Family Biz Show.
Welcome everybody to The Family Biz Show. I'm your host, Michael Palumbos with Family Wealth and Legacy in Rochester, New York. And today we have Scott Saslow here. Scott is the author of Building a Sustainable Family Office and the founder of One World Investments. Scott, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you for allowing me to share some of that.
One of the, we always do the where did you come from and how did you get here kind of a thing. So kind of take us through, very few people end up writing books about family offices. So there's got to be a story behind, your journey to get to where you are today.
Yeah, thank you for allowing me to share some of that. Let's see. So I'm a Chicago boy, a proud Midwesterner. I grew up when my father had already purchased and had been running a family-held business. This was a manufacturing company in Chicago. The business made dental and medical products. And kind of a neat story. My father bought it from an entrepreneur that had come to Chicago in the early 1900s, 1908. And that entrepreneur had run the business from 1908 to 1958. And he tripled the size of the business. In 1908, it was one person. And in 1958, it was three people. So my father bought it when it was a teeny little company. And he grew it very successfully. The subsequent 60 years, it was in the family. And my father ran it the first 30 years. And my brother then took the helm the next 30 years. They both did a tremendous job. It became a global powerhouse in its field. And in 2019, the family decided it was an appropriate opportunity to sell. And so we had a liquidity event for the family. And whereas I was never involved other than, some summers in college and that sort of thing in the family business, I became very interested and more active in the family office. And I can kind of walk through that a little bit. But that's kind of the broad strokes story of, kind of my background and connection to family business and family office.
Love it. So let's talk about for the people that are listening the first time and they just heard the word family office, they've been part of the family business for years. That only happens for families that have a very successful business and a liquidity event. Now we've got, can you dig into that a little bit? What is a family office and why would you do that?
Family office generally refers to the infrastructure that a family, typically it's a family, it can start with an individual, sets up to help them manage their wealth plus. So yes, it's typically when a threshold of wealth is met. It might be 50 million, it might be a little bit north of there. But the point is, it becomes complex enough that instead of going to a retail investment advisor and saying, manage my capital, you start to bring some of those services in-house. The amount of work, the amount of complexity becomes where, I can probably hire part-time accountant, maybe a full-time investment advisor, and cobbled together a team. And then for some family offices, and it does generally scale with the amount of wealth, they have very significant teams. They have armies. And some of the family offices are 500 people, some of the most kind of notable family names out there. So what's kind of interesting and relates to family business is often this activity will start within a family business. It's usually referred to as an embedded family office. And it might quite frankly be, and this was the case in our family, my father had a trusted accountant in the accounting department and an attorney. And that's where some of the quote family activity, as opposed to the business activity, started, where some of those individuals were kind of tasked with, in addition to their quote day job on the operating company, can you help us set up some structures that will benefit the family? Can we protect some of this capital in the form of a trust? Can we do some smart estate planning? Can you help us manage these investments and those sorts of things? So that's a very typical thing. I would say it gets, for any publicly traded company, you want to be very careful and have a nice kind of separation between family office activities and family business. But even in privately held companies, I think it's wise to be thoughtful about how much of that you actually do want to do. And there's a whole host of reasons I can get into, but that's often where you will start to see some wealth management on behalf of the broader family within a family operating company.
So going back, this is 2019, you get interested in this. I'm assuming, I'm taking a leap of faith that you are writing this book wrote this book because you went through some things.
Yeah, exactly.
Had some learning experiences that you wanted to make sure that other people might not have had to go through the same learning experiences.
Yeah, indeed. And it was a very intense learning process in those years, 2019, 2020. A confluence of events necessitated that I helped to essentially stand up my family line. Now I'm talking about my wife and my two children, and set that up as an additional family office, in addition to the legacy one that I had with my father. My father passed actually a year after the liquidity event. So now we're talking 2020, in the middle of COVID and all that craziness. We needed to, as a family, kind of move quickly. My siblings and I have two siblings, and recreate some of this family office. And, a little bit on my career path, whereas I wasn't involved in the operating company, in college and shortly after, and after grad school, I got very interested in entrepreneurship. Most of my career is in startup situations. I've been a founder of 7 different founding teams of startups. Some have been my own companies. Some have been ones that I started in other big companies, Microsoft notably, as well as another one called Siebel in the Bay Area. And so I was kind of a startup guy. I had my career path. But as the years clicked on, I got more and more intrigued about the family office activity. And at this point in time, it moved out from being an embedded function in the family operating company. And it had kind of essentially was its own entity then that was created to manage that family office. But the reality is I was never full-time running that. And that's often the case with a lot of families, especially when there's an operating company and the family members are running the company. They really can't do both. They're essentially 2 different companies. And so often you'll see that. You'll see family office principals or owners that they're running the company and or they're doing something other than running the family office full time. And as was the case with our family back in 2019, we had some outside talent that was hired to run it. And so the point was, whereas I needed to kind of quickly jump in, grab the reins and recreate a lot of it, that was a very intense period. And I would love this book that I've now written. It came out this past July, to be helpful to anyone who's either thinking about doing that, or, as often the case, there are plenty of existing family offices, and sometimes they go through the transitions. If they're successful and if they're robust, they will stand the test of time. And then a new generation comes in, and often naturally they'll have their own ideas of how they'll want that office to function. And so I think the book can be helpful in either case. And then as well to the service provider community, all the wealth management, estate planning, accounting, all the service providers. There's a great kind of ecosystem. I hope that this can be an insider's view, kind of coming from the principal side of what it's like to both create and run a family office.
What were some of the things that were happening inside the family office? What were some of the services that were happening? I have found through the years, it's not like there's 75,000 family offices. I don't know what the number is, but it's compared to the number of successful businesses, and it's only 1% of U.S. businesses ever break the $10 million mark in revenues. So even that number is small. So we're starting off with a small group. And then when we're, moving into the level of needing a family office is probably even smaller. So there's, for a lot of the people that are listening right now, okay, there's a family office, get it. I've got estate planning needs, I've got wealth management needs, I've got all of these different pieces that we're putting together. And they're right. I have, thinking of the families that I serve, there's many of the family businesses where, some of the first acts of the family office, and I'm doing air quotes for those that are listening, are happening because, we need to put an employment policy in place for the business. So we're thinking about the family and we're thinking about the business. And so that might be one of the first things that we're thinking about. During a liquidity event, what were the things that you were going through? What were the things that were happening for you? What were the services that you were really focusing in on to make sure the family was taken care of?
Great set of questions. So let me see. So the first thing I would say is for operators of family held businesses, I actually don't believe there's that great a distinction when it comes to managing a family office. The problem is as follows. Many principals lose sight of that. In other words, they put their heart and soul, blood, sweat, and tears into running a family business. They're successful. They create wealth. And then something happens where they kind of go down this false assumption. I can just kind of put the money over here or with this provider or this person, or this was my trusted advisor, my accountant. He or she must know what he's doing, right? And that's a very dangerous thing. And I understand why it happens, especially when there's a liquidity event. We can talk about that. But often in those situations, the founder, rightfully so, wants to take some time and chill and enjoy the wealth that they've created for their family. But the reality is making money. This is a point I steal out of Morgan Housel's great book, The Psychology of Money. It's appropriate for any wealth owner, whatever that level of wealth is. Making money and keeping money are two different things. And I've seen time and time again, fantastic entrepreneurs. These could be those that created the wealth at the first generational level, or, inheritors in a family office system who then went on to do great things with their wealth. But running an operating company and running what's effectively an investment shop, but with a couple of weird quirks on it because it's designed to serve a family and not kind of the general public, they're very different. The most successful cases, I guess, are where maybe it's a hedge fund manager or a venture capitalist who's created the wealth, and then they go to create this family office for their own wealth. That tends to go well, right? Because they're very familiar. But I've seen it time and again, a successful entrepreneur worked really hard, kind of, caught lightning in a bottle once, let's say, and thinks, oh, this will be easy. I'll just, the wealth can go over here. I'll hire a couple people and it's all good. So, back to good practices, whether that's talent management practices, whether it's succession practices, whether it's good kind of practices regarding the talent that how you hire that talent, how you manage that talent. All of that applies in a family office ecosystem. And I wish more principals, would kind of do just that. Take those same principles that made the wealth in the first place and use it for managing the wealth. Now, again, if finance is not your thing, maybe you have a construction company, or maybe you have, in the medical field or real estate, however it is you created that wealth. If running the numbers directly, managing the capital directly is not your thing, that's okay, reasonable. Find someone whose job it is, and that's their expertise. So the phrase we'd use there is kind of like, at least know how to manage the managers. And that means know what to look for in terms of good performance, know when it's time to move on and swap out. You and I were talking before the call. I mean, this is a very common problem you see, which is loyalty sometimes, becomes a deciding factor around how long to keep someone on the team or even a vendor relationship. And sometimes there's good in that. There's trust, there's familiarity. But quite honestly, running a $1 million business and the providers that you need to help you to do that, compared to then when it's a $100 million business, it's a different level of expertise. And someone that can manage your wealth when you have $1 million in liquid money may not be the same sort of person that can manage it when it's now $100 million and it gets a lot more complex. So on one hand, I'm saying, some of those same good kind of business practices of managing a family office also apply to a family office. And even quite frankly, if there's not a distinct office, even if it is just, let's say it's a kernel of that, and it's something embedded in the operating company, but be really thoughtful about about how that wealth is managed, and hire the right people. Don't hire this one or that one out of convenience because you already know them and trust them.
Sure.
It's okay to have them in the pool, the candidate pool, but make sure your pool is a little bigger.
You know what? You're the first person that I've spoken with that talked about the family office the same way you would talk about a business. And something's clicked for me that I really want to make sure that people catch on to. Jim Collins, Good to Great, talks about identify the right seats, put the right people in those seats, and then make sure they're doing the right things, right? It should be no different for the family office. And so now there's, like in your family office when it started, what were some of the functions? What were some of the seats that you identified to make that happen for your family office? And I've spoken to other family office people, and I had Peter Mustakowski from Fox, on the show. And so it's just jumping at me right now is that, you hear the phrase, if you've seen one family office, you've seen one family office. And a lot of people don't like that. But at the same time, it's so true because what functions you need in your family office may be different than somebody else's. So it's going to look different.
Absolute. It's a great point. So as an undergrad, I was trained as an economist, and I think a lot about supply and demand. And when you think about a family office, supply and demand, so the needs of a family office, that's a very dynamic thing. You as an individual are changing. You may have family members who are changing, evolving. They're going through life stages. And so the demand side of the equation is changing. But guess what? So is the supply side, especially these days. There have been so many. To your question about number, the research I showed talks in the figures of 10 to 15,000 global family offices.
Global, right.
Global. And a lot of them have been created in the last decade, which means they're new, they're getting their sea legs. And guess what? The provider community, whether that's wealth managers, estate planners, accountants, et cetera, they're all over this trend. They're very excited, as they should be. It's a great opportunity to bring some expertise to this community. But the point is, if both supply and demand are evolving, you have to really stay on your toes. And that's one of the things I talk about in the book. One of the big lessons is, just like you would manage an entrepreneurial business, this is no different. It's a business, to our earlier point. It's not something you can kind of hire a few people and put it on autopilot. You've now started a new company, whether you like it or not, accept that reality. And two, it's a very entrepreneurial business. You're never, quote, done setting up the family office. So, okay, to your question, what the hell is in these family businesses? So yes, wealth management, asset management tends to be the most obvious and probably universal. Sometimes that can be insourced, i.e. I'm going to hire someone to manage my different assets and the different asset classes, and increasingly, interestingly, it's finding third-party providers that can do this as an arm's length relationship for the family. So you have liquid capital, you have private capital, you have all the various asset classes. How do you want to manage that? Who's managing that? Does it make sense? There's efficiencies to having one, neck to choke, so to speak, but there's also some advantages if the assets are so substantive in certain asset classes that you want to find some specialists. So there's a whole bunch of kind of activity around that. That's one of the foundational pieces. The third foundational piece is estate planning and kind of legal in general, right? So one of the first things you want to do, should you be fortunate enough to have an exit, or even if, nice liquid capital has been pulled out of the operating company over the years, how do you want to manage that capital? How do you want to protect it from creditors? How do you want to think about, are you looking to pass it on to your family, or you want to pass it on to your college or the local community hospital? What do you want to do with that capital? And when do you want to do that? You may not know all those answers. You don't want to make any rash decisions, but you want to gradually, and I would say periodically, revisit some of these key decisions with your estate planners so you can do it in a way that's tax efficient, that protects the capital, that allows it to grow in the way it can. And then the third, I would say, is kind of on the accounting front. And again, sometimes family offices, even bigger ones, are guilty of kind of not having all the processes in place and all the let's say checks and balances and systems. But that is, you're being kind of, penny wise, pound foolish if you skimp there. It's going to bite you. It's eventually. So again, doesn't mean you have to build it all in-house, but if you're thinking about XYZ national firm, boy, I can get it a lot more cheaper. This guy on the internet that I found, or, my neighbor, they can do yeah, is that really worth it? Is it worth like saving 60 grand and then your chances of audit just went up fivefold? And guess what? If you're audited, you're going to spend hundreds of thousands, so I say, like, be thoughtful. Sometimes I'll see family offices where they think, I created this money and this is great, and I want all of that money to be accessible for me and for my family, or for people I want to give it to down the road, philanthropy. And I understand that mindset, but by the same token, you have to properly invest in the infrastructure so that it is well managed, and don't skimp on that. Right?
Yeah.
That's not the place you want to cut corners.
I would say it's all three. You can't cut corners in all three of those if you're going to hire a great attorney inside the family office. And this is where I think it's really worthwhile for people to understand. I think you threw out the number of, like, starting around $50 million. I think it might be tough. When you start talking about, you've got benefits for these, if you're just talking three positions: a wealth advisor, somebody to help you to do the research and put those pieces together, an attorney in-house, and a good accountant in-house. Just the salaries of those three people alone, then you throw benefits on top of that to bring them in, to entice them to leave whatever area they're in. If they're that good for your family, I can't imagine they're working for less than $400,000. I mean, I'm just throwing a broad number out there.
Yes.
If at $400,000, now you're sitting at three people at $400,000 plus benefits, you're at $1.2 million plus. And if you had $100 million, there's 1% of assets plus. And so that's where people really need to be thinking about, is it better? Am I outsourcing up until a certain point? And when do I bring it in-house?
And I totally agree. And I would say what's really fascinating is I'm seeing some very substantial family offices from an AUM standpoint, an investable asset standpoint, go back to what's called an MFO model, or a multifamily office. So MFO, you can think of it as an investment shop that is not owned by any one family. Some start out as being owned by a family, and then they kind of spin out or they take on other clients, but they serve many clients. And the reason is just as you say, to help spread those fixed costs. But it's also, sometimes families start and they get all excited and they start hiring people and they realize, shit, I don't want to hire people. I don't want to manage people. That's why I sold my business. I want to be like on the road and in my boat, right? Yep. So you're totally right. The good news is, back to the ecosystem and how it's evolving, there are so many options to choose from. You can hire that finance person, accounting person, legal expert on a full-time basis, on a part-time basis. You can, go to a third-party entity that is serving many families and get the expertise of their serving many different situations. And I always say, like, take it slow before you start staffing up. Be thoughtful. What do you need today? What do you need in the future? Right. What is your expertise? If your expertise isn't in managing people necessarily, or that's not your interest, don't build a team, right? Go to an MFO and let them do the heavy lifting for you. So I see this not only, and feel like maybe we didn't fully answer the question, what else is, under the guise of the family office? So in addition to those functions, it depends on the family's interests, right? Okay, so in my own family, one of the areas I'm very interested in, one of my jobs is running an early stage seed fund. It's a venture capital fund, and we invest in early stage companies, seed and pre-seed, and we'll stick with them usually through their early institutional rounds. Now, that's something I know and love, and I've been on the other side as an entrepreneur. I feel I'm well-versed to do that. I sit in Silicon Valley. I see a lot of good deal flow. And so, that's an area where I've kind of insourced it, if you will. And I'm actually wearing the third of my time or whatever is doing that activity, and look to actually hire some more people internal to do that. Other family offices may say, I don't want to touch venture capital. It's not my thing. Or we'll do it, but I'm going to do it by investing in a few funds and call it a day. And that's how we'll get our exposure. So, that's the beauty. There are so many different options of how one's money could be invested, and no shortage of people that would love to help you with it. And on that front, I'd say, I guess, just like anything, just like if you're hiring a CFO for your operating company, do your due diligence, ask around, ask for references, find references that weren't given to you. understand how these people work. Just because they come from a brand name, a Goldman or a Morgan, doesn't mean they're a good fit for you. So, really think about what your needs are, because there's seemingly an endless supply of providers, but it's all about finding a good match.
Very, very great. Again, I'm still loving the family office is just an extension of the business. It's just a beautiful way for people to understand this. Because a lot, to your point, and it struck again with the second time you said it, sometimes somebody has that liquidity event and the last thing that's on their mind is running another business. And so if you're going to start a family office, you are running another business. You're not going to be sitting on the boat. You're not going to be, flying around the world doing what you enjoy and love. You're going to be managing that if you want it to be successful. No different than you managed your business to become successful.
You can, again, like an operating company, you can, I'd say eventually in time, move to, let's say, a board position. You can be the chairman. You don't have to run it. But I will say this, if you're standing it up and it's the first time in your family that this kind of separate office is being created, you should be intimately involved. If you were building a house, let's say, you're not going to just like hire a owner's representative to go build your house. You're going to be involved, you and your partner. That's the fun stuff. Like, what color is the bathroom in the basement, and what kind of towel we want on the deck? Like
towels and towels and whatnot, right?
Absolutely. Get involved, know these people. And then, once it's built and it's had a cycle or two, you can pull back a little. Maybe you can hire a full-time CEO. That's not an unusual thing at all. Unfortunately, there's sometimes a mindset, which is either like, I'm running it, I'm doing it, I'm running my business. You told me to run a business, right, Scott? Or I'm not involved at all. And I hire someone and then I just do a quarterly check-in and I kind of hope that the numbers are good. Well, that's not good either, right? There's a lot of gray in between. So and in these bigger families and multi-generation families, there's great opportunities. You bring the next gen in, maybe they're not finance people, maybe they're all about public health, or one's a doctor, one's a social worker, one's whatever they all want to do, but there's still meaningful ways they can be involved. And this is also, I think, a really cool aspect of the family office world or wherever you have a material amount of wealth. People may know this. So if so, cut me off and we'll go on to the next topic. But there's so many interesting ways to use capital, right? On one hand, it can be given away, philanthropy. That's a beautiful thing. Help out society and the environment and the community. It can obviously go to support the family, whatever their interests are. That can be, I want to blow it. I want to go to Vegas and put it on red. Fine, no judgment. Or I want to invest in a new business and start a new, yet a new career. Great. All of that's wonderful. What I find really interesting, and this is just a little bit of a peek into my other part of work I do on the sustainable investing front, is there's ways to take your capital, even while it's sitting in a bank or in funds or with managers earning a return for you, and that then can lead to more capital for you to enjoy and use as you choose. You can also put it toward things that can have some sort of broader impact. And this kind of gets to probably where something I imagine will resonate great with your audience. You referenced some of the good to greats and some of the great business minds out there. What I took away from a lot of that great work and those business gurus was the importance of purpose in business. Yeah, you got to run a tight shop. All your functions have to be, kind of top notch, hiring great people, everything, doing a great job of the basics, building great product, satisfying your customers. But when you can attach a purpose to your business, boy, does that become something that's inspiring, that helps you attract and keep talent. Your customers get excited about that. They tell other customers. Same exact thing with a family office. And unfortunately, especially with kind of the first time or new family offices, the mentality is, well, I don't know, I guess I have to invest this money, so let me think about investing this money. And yes, that's true. But there's also an opportunity to think broader and say, in addition to me and maybe my family members enjoying some of this capital, what can we do with it that will be inspiring and beneficial to folks outside of the family? And there's a way to do both. It's not just either I keep it for myself or I give it away. Nothing wrong with just, straight up philanthropy. We want more of that, certainly in this world. But I'm saying there's this middle ground, which I find pretty interesting.
Yeah, I want to expand on that a little bit. I love the idea of strategic investments because I do think that forget when we think about philanthropy and, it always goes to that giving it away, but investing in companies that are doing really good work and doing really great things, we forget that that's okay for a lot of people. And for matter of fact, for a lot of people, I think that they would rather do that, but they just don't know how, and they haven't been taught about it, or they haven't thought about it. So go back to, if I'm the most successful companies out there, they have a core purpose that's bigger than just making a profit. Yeah. Well, it's why do we exist beyond making a profit? My company, the core purpose is strengthen families, strengthen wealth, and strengthen legacy. It's all of those pieces, thus family, wealth, and legacy. But we really realize that, it's not about the money. If we're not helping the family become a tighter, more functional unit, more emotionally intelligent, then we're really not doing the services that we're supposed to be doing, in my opinion.
Absolutely agree.
So
Absolutely.
This is pretty neat. Talk about that. What are some of the ways that through the years that you have had that kind of an impact in some of the work that you're doing?
For me, I do get really excited about the direct investing in these early stage startups. If you're a 20 something, they tend to be wired in a good way, in a positive way, toward wanting to do both. Many of them want to work in business. They want to work in the private sector, but they want to be at a company that, where they can, is also deriving some broader good for the society. So for some companies that might mean, they look after neglected populations. They try even harder to hire veterans into the workforce. They feel a soft spot for that population. They haven't gotten a fair shake in life. And wouldn't it be great if our company can find a meaningful way? It's not charity, but we want to look extra hard at those veterans and see if we can find a place for them in our company. And those sort of things are pretty magical, right? Or it might be, hey, we have a company, we really care about the environment. We think there's some things that we can do, the way that we buy our energy, the way we consume energy within the company. Let's be more smart about it. By the way, it's good economics. We're going to save money, so it's going to hit the bottom line, but we're also going to do it in a way that we think is kind of additive to the broader society. So there's many ways for companies, irrespective of what their mission is. They don't have to be like a Ben & Jerry's, dyed in the wool, impact kind of company. A lot of the early startups I love investing, I'd say, are, both the way that they're run, but also their core purpose is what I would call pretty impactful. So let me give you some examples. So one of our startups is called Elemento Health, and it's a digital health app that helps frontline responders, so think nurses and paramedics and whatnot, with educational services so that they can do their job even better, and the people that they're serving benefit by the education that they're getting. They found like micro courses and micro avenues to deliver content to this specific population. Okay. Another completely different sort of company that we're backers of, very excited, is called Lilac Solutions. They have invented a new way of processing lithium. The way that lithium is historically processed is expensive, time consuming, and it's actually can be pretty damaging to the environment. It consumes a ton of fresh water. They've invented a process that does this all better, cheaper, faster, better for the environment. And lithium is among today's gold, and it's holding back in some ways the transition to clean energy, the lack of supply. So that's a really cool company in a completely different field. We have education technology companies that are focused on the kind of the emotional health of kids. I know this, unfortunately, all too well. My youngest is in middle school, and I see the emotional health in middle schools and high schools, and it's really scary. These kids, especially, with on the heels of lockdown and COVID and all this, they've gone through a lot. And so the company is called Sown to Grow. It's all about helping teachers and administrators get a sense of which kids are most at risk and how could the school respond in a proactive way. Hey, this student here, that student there, they actually need a little bit more support. They're really struggling, and maybe they're not they don't walk in their teacher and say, hey, I'm struggling today. And so, we think these are good businesses. They're all, the amount of good that they do correlates to their sales. They only do good if they sell. These aren't charities. They're selling product and service. So we get really excited about that. If your thing is more investing in the public markets, there's kind of ways to do what's called sustainable investing. And I think this is a really exciting area. And about a third of all professionally managed dollars, over $1 trillion, are in sustainable strategies on a global basis. So it's no longer kind of a niche, side area, this notion of sustainable investing. And I think that's good for everyone.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Go back to your book for a second, and I know this is part of the book. These are some of the things that you talk about in the book, correct? Is there anything that we haven't talked about? What are, any other foundational tenets of the book that we should be hitting on before?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the main one you quickly jumped on, which is, manage a family office, or if it's not officially a separate family office, it's an embedded into your business. It's your financial function. Manage it just as rigorously as you do your business. Understand, we came up with kind of like a 5-point model, right? When we looked at the family offices that seemed to be the most successful, that were, stood the test of time. They were now 4th or 5th generation family offices. There's some in Europe. Europe even has more that are, 6th and 7th, 8th generation. I mean, it's really staggering, but those are clearly the exception. Many, quite frankly, won't make it to the 2nd generation, let alone 3rd or 5th. But the point is, what are the things, again, kind of a la good to great? What did those families do differently? It starts with a mindset. They understand the challenge at hand. They respect the challenge at hand. Back to the Morgan Housel quote, keeping money and making money and keeping money are 2 different things. Number 2 is the mission. They attach some sort of mission to this family capital that is really helpful for a couple of reasons. Number 1, it helps to engage the rest of the family. The number 1 challenge that a family office principals have is not like, oh, am I getting a good enough return, or should I be more exposed to equity or debt or what have you? It's how do I engage the broader family in this? This is what a beautiful opportunity I, as a founder, been presented with. What a lucky person! A lot of luck, a lot of hard work. But how do I extend this to the broader family? So having a mission is a great way to do that. And to your earlier point, attracting talent, getting good, if you even if you have endless dollars to bring in and hire a great chief investment officer, there's a war for talent for those positions. All the institutional funds are throwing money and services and benefits. So point is, when you have a mission and you say, look, here's how I created this money and here's what we want to kind of do with it going forward, that helps remarkably in terms of being able to attract good talent. The third is around structure, and I get into some of the details about how you can actually set this up and kind of what to do first and so forth. The fourth is one, again, I think for any GM, any CEO of a family business will get this in 2 seconds, which is talent management. Who's driving the bus? Who's on the bus? Are they the right people? Is the person in seat 3 really should be in seat 7? Person in seat 7 should be off the bus. Why do you keep them around if they should be off the bus, right? So it's taking a hard look at talent, and again, based on your needs. And then the last point is, I think we touched on as well around being entrepreneurial, understanding that you're never really there. It's continual improvement, and it's a living, breathing organism, and that needs to be your mindset. Doesn't mean you have to spend 60 hours a week. But just know, that there's going to be some meaningful work on the front end, and it's a good thing if you're never done. You're constantly making changes.
Great. No, I appreciate the summary and putting them together so that we could hear them all together. That's helpful for a lot of people.
Of course.
When you're going through, do you do any consulting for family offices or somebody that's going through this, or is it, is that any of the work that you do? I didn't ask you that.
Not formally. We don't do that as kind of a paid advisory service, but by the same token, I'm happy to have an informal conversation and see if I can be helpful. Again, we're not managing third-party capital. We know a lot of people that do that. Should someone be looking for that? We're not estate experts, but we can certainly recommend people. So, I'm happy for your community to be kind of a peer that they can call on and say, hey, I'm trying to kind of think about this, or do you know someone that does X, Y, Z? But generally, no, we don't take this sort of work on in a paid capacity.
Your book is going to get people in the right path regardless. So
I sure hope so. That's, anyone who's written a book knows you don't do it for the money. You do it because you want to get the ideas out there and see if you can help people. And if that could be my small little dent on this planet, then I'm happy.
Perfect. Talk about for just a second, what is the future of your family office? Where are you going? What are some of the things, your priorities over the next 5, 10, 15 years?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you for asking. So, one is I have to practice what I preach and, continue to invest and see where we want to make changes. As I alluded to earlier, I do have two youngish kids, middle school and high school. We'll see, in the years to come, if they want to be affiliated in any way. My philosophy there, and maybe this is good to hear for those in the family business construct too, is, hope for the best, but prepare for the worst. And by best, I mean, I will have continued to grown, this capital, not just the financial capital, but all the work, the intellectual capital, all the work that we're doing at One World. And there'll be some interesting opportunities should my children or even my broader family, nieces and nephews, want to be involved in some way, full-time, part-time, running it all, a board member, whatever it might look like. So I hope for that. And I want to be deliberate about creating those opportunities. But by the same token, most want, especially my kids, to kind of find their own path and do what they deem interesting and valuable with their limited time on this planet. And no offense if that's not at all affiliated. So, one does need to think about kind of the sustainability of the work. And it's kind of interesting because I grew up with a family a family business in the broader family. As I mentioned, I wasn't directly involved in that, but it was, of course, part of every family gathering and, dinner conversation. And then with an exit, that capital largely flows into kind of family office or family offices across the different family members. But what I find interesting is in some ways, I find myself now creating what I'd call a family business, meaning these are operating companies that the purpose is not just to benefit the family office. It's actually to create an operating company that, just like any regular business, has external clients and revenue sources and so forth and so on. So I'm in the process, long way of answering your question, in the process of doing that with some of my entities, kind of transitioning them, if you will, from a family office back to a family business. And then time will tell, who from the broader family may want to be involved. But if the answer is no one, that's okay. And they need to be built to, essentially attract and retain talent on their own 2 feet.
Love it. You're sitting in front of a group of family businesses that are getting ready for a liquidity event in the next 5 years. What is your, pieces of advice as they're getting ready? Or they're not there yet. They're thinking about it. They're going to have it. What should they be thinking about?
Yeah, it's a great question. Well, it probably would be to start with, who is whatever amount of wealth has been created and pulled out of the business thus far, who's managing that? And are they the right person after any liquidity event? And, sometimes that can be tough because it can be kind of it's my colleague, I've trusted advisor for 20 years. But you have to be realistic and you have to, do your homework a bit, right? And dig in and say, okay, I mean, it's interesting, right? There's I think a truism in the asset management world for the client side, which is you don't want to be the biggest client at your investment advisor. You also don't want to be the smallest, right? Ideally, you're somewhere in the middle, the sweet spot. And the company's been built to service clients that kind of look like you. You don't want to be like 30% of the whole firm's capital, and you don't want to be a half of a percent. How much attention are you going to get? So I often after a liquidity event, it is time to kind of look at the advisor. Now, doesn't mean they go from everything to zero. Maybe they join an advisory board for you and they help you in the search and they have the continuity and they're with you for the next 5-10 years still. So I guess that's step one. Think about who's actually could manage the money. Step two is, clean up any skeletons in the closet, so to speak, as it relates to just, different legal structures, different ownership. Make sure that you're very comfortable. You know exactly how the company shares are owned and managed. God forbid there's a divorce, tomorrow or in 5 years or in 10 years. What does that actually mean? Are you comfortable with that? Do you feel like you and your spouse are aligned on those things? And, so I'd say that's another area to kind of dig into before, you don't wait till the liquidity event and they say, okay, let's have those tough conversations, right? Those would probably be the two that I think warrant the most. And then it's also, look, it's never too early for some soul searching, which is to say, okay, do I want that liquidity event? Like I always used to think that was the goal when I started the company. I always thought, do I still want that? Or maybe there's a middle ground. Maybe I want to sell a controlling interest, but I still want to be around. There's a lot of founders and CEOs who, kind of rightfully so, are kind of scared to death of like retiring, like all of a sudden waking up and they sign the papers. They have nothing to do the next day. Or for some, it sounds really sexy, but honestly, after a couple of months, they're bored to tears.
Yeah. We
Right?
run a program called for the CEOs in that position called From Success to Significance. And the
I
idea
love
is,
that. Great name.
it's three, steps to walk them through to get them thinking about all of those concepts and ideas and what do I want? Where do I want my future to look like? And let's face it, we're all mortal. So I'm not on this planet for an indefinite amount of time after this. So what really is the most important? What are my values? What do I want to put together? So, and we have found that to be a really powerful transition for CEOs to think about those things.
Absolute. And again, there's so many shades of gray to how an acquisition can go and to whom it could go and what your role will be. And, there's so many different ways to slice and dice that. So it's probably a good thought exercise to periodically dream a little and say, okay, if I really had this opportunity, how would I want it to go? Because as often is the case, all of a sudden an acquisition opportunity will come. It's like pedal to the metal. Sometimes you don't have a second to think, and it's paperwork and it's due diligence and it's intense and there's attorneys and it's like, whoa, wait, how exactly do I want this to play out? If you've at least thought about a few versions of it ahead of time, you'll probably be able to manage to one of those ends.
Scott, this has been a wonderful conversation. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Scott Saslow, author of Building a Sustainable Family Office. Thank you for joining us. Your book is available, I would imagine, on all of the major platforms, Amazon, or just Google the book and you ought to be able to find it.
Indeed. Yes. Yeah.
I appreciate your time and appreciate you sharing your experiences with all of us today. Look forward to reading. I have not read the book, so I apologize. I'm going to buy the book because I just think that there's so many little nuggets in there for people that we're working with. For me, it's end of the year and going a little haywire, but we will grab that and put that on the list.
When you have a chance to look at it, let me know if you have questions. But I appreciate the opportunity, Michael. I think it's really wonderful what you're doing with the podcast and sharing this knowledge. It helps thousands and thousands of people make better decisions, and you should feel great about that. It's quality work.
Well, thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Again, I'm Michael Palumbos from Family Wealth and Legacy. You've been listening to the Family Biz Show, and we can't wait to have you on the next episode. Listen in with us. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Don't miss an episode. Subscribe now on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts.